Hey, I'm Shay McGalley.
And I'm David Keener.
And this is Hourlings podcast project. Tonight's topic is writing characters that are children. Um, I came up in a conversation with Dave earlier today. I came up with this topic because I have recently read a couple books in a row where they did a really crappy job at writing the children characters. Very two-dimensional. Uh, they were not the primary characters in these stories, but man, you can't just make them paper thin. And in the stories that I've written that had children in it, it's definitely been more complicated than that. They were, you know, in my favorite case, murderous little assholes that got killed by my cat, and so um, uh, writing three-dimensional children characters uh, should not be forgotten because paper paper thin cliche kids are just not cool. What do you guys think?
I think the problem you often see with children characters in books is the same problem that you often see with the way people treat children in general, I think, in the world. And that is often the case that they treat them like they're not actual individuals, with their own personalities and their own fears and desires and skills, but rather just, children. And I think authors sometimes use children as like an obstacle, maybe like, oh, another thing I have to worry about, a mouth to feed. Um, or they just, or on the other hand, if the children are the protagonists, sometimes they just completely ignore their childhood and
Now,
their
in the case of these last couple books I read, and I didn't like either of them, so I'm not even going to sit to mention the titles. They were not young adult books. It's a whole different ball game if all of your characters, including the protagonist, are children. I mean, that's like Harry Potter and a bazillion other
yeah.
young adult books that are out there. And in the case of the books I was referencing, in both cases, these were children under 10. These were, you know, Rugrats kind of um, um, from toddlers to 10-year-olds.
Well,
And
you can get those from central casting.
yeah, I know. But the thing is you just can't, just lightly paint them like furniture because kids at those days had, being a father, trust me, they got personality like you wouldn't believe, and
Yeah.
um, and they're characters, and they can be fun.
Yeah.
And another thing I'd add is don't just include them for no reason. If they're not developing the setting, the plot, the other characters and stuff, don't just put in superfluous children for no reason. I mean, it's you
Well,
know,
there's a scene in Game of Thrones where a very young Arya, um, is talking about the king, and she's like, he's he's just an old fat man who drinks all the time, and it's like, kids can say stuff that adults can't say, and it's absolutely true, and it's part of the reason why, uh, you know, he's in the process of having his kingdom taken from him, basically.
Yeah.
But it all comes from the viewpoint of the child, who, at least in this instance, sees things more clearly than the adults.
right. That's just one trait that children possess that can be utilized to very good effect to one, develop their character, and two, to advance plot and things like
Honesty.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, honesty. The fact that you know I love it when children will wander off and discover something they shouldn't
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
Um, I like it when um, children become a monkey wrench. Um,
Hmm.
They're going to blow up their
I have
brains. Oh,
read
great.
plenty of books where the protagonist, was in the midst of, kicking ass and taking names, but suddenly there's a child that he just can't, if it had been a full ass adult man, he would have just walked away and just let him take care of himself. But if it's a little boy, you got to save him. And
Yeah, that's a good point. I think children also offer a chance for a character's true morality to come out. Like what would they do in the face of a child in danger? That's a great test.
that's
To
right.
see.
It's like the ultimate save the cat. Um,
So
save the
did
little
you guys
girl.
see the Jason Bourne movies?
Yeah.
So there's a scene where he's finally remembering who he is, and he's um, flashing back to he swum out to a yacht way offshore to kill this guy, and he's coming up behind him, and then he notices that the guy he's about to assassinate has a little child just hugging him from the front. And can he actually kill this guy right in front of the guy's kid? And it turns out, the answer is no, he can't, and that's why he ends up failing in the mission, and everything else happens. Uh, that's probably a spoiler, but
Yeah, I know. One of my
it's
favorite
it's been 10
movies.
plus years.
Yeah, one of my
Um,
favorite movies of all time is Leon the Professional. And
yep,
um, Natalie Portman's is it Natalie Portman who starred in that?
yeah, her
Yeah, it
first
was her
movie.
very first role. And she was a child. And it was great how they developed the character for that in that movie. And Leon had the rule, no women, no kids. And uh, that it was
You
the
broke them both.
genesis of the whole plot of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So how do you keep children characters from falling into like annoying tropes, like being whiny or being obnoxious or you know I don't know.
Well, therein lies the rub. Um, you have to write characters that don't suck. It's hard for authors. It's really interesting. I was thinking about it, and I was wondering the challenges for people that don't have children. And I've had children. I've seen them in their asshole stages. I've seen them in their whiny little bitches. You want to, send them to bed without supper because they only eat food that's white. You know, it's um, uh, it's a reality for me. I think it'd be a bigger challenge, and I think that that's often a problem. People that haven't been around children a lot um, uh, maybe don't have the three-dimensional experience that can do them. It's like trying to, write all kinds of characters that you have fundamental lack of knowledge regarding. What do you guys think?
Well, I don't have kids, but I do have pets. And while if a building is burning, I will grab a child before I'll grab a dog. I'll confess, but um, dogs can be like very simple children, and
Well,
even
it's an
then,
interesting point because I have read books where it was obvious that even though there was a dog in this book, this person never owned a dog.
right?
So it's the same kind of challenge.
Yeah, and okay. Like I said, I'm not going to equate them specifically, but I will say dogs have personalities. They have their little quirks. So do children. And those quirks are things you can potentially use. Maybe the kid is really, really, really fussy, but on a long trip, the kid never asks, "Are we there yet?" Because they're too busy reading one of their books. Right now, you've added a little personality to the kid. And later on, when the kid is like exploring something and finds out something he or she's not supposed to do, you're like, this kid's got imagination. This kid would do that. I think you can flesh them out like secondary characters. They should have some characteristics. Maybe they even have an arc.
Yeah,
So one of
go ahead.
one of the least popular characters on the Emmy-winning show Modern Family is the daughter Lily. And she started out as an infant in the first season and grew into just a kid. And I think one of the reasons why she's unpopular is because her main personality trait was just to be sassy. And like every time there was an opportunity to have sass and attitude, she would like hit that note in the scene, and that was it. And so I think that one fault you can make with writing children characters is if you give them like just one note that they just hit in a certain, when they get queued up for that note, they hit it. It's like being in a band and all you have is like one tambourine and nothing else, and that's all you hit.
Cowbell. Yeah.
Yeah, cowbell. Yeah. So if a kid is a cowbell in your story, I think that's a pretty easy way to make them annoying to the reader.
Yeah.
So, and that just goes in with all we were saying about making them three-dimensional. But I thought that was a good
But I
example
think
of,
that's not just a child character. That's any secondary character. If all they're there to do is to be an asshole or to
Right. In
or to be
fact,
sarcastic,
secondary characters, the same thing is can be said about secondary characters. I think that there is another level of things to add when these characters are children.
yeah,
It's uh, it's important, especially I've it occurred to me while I was thinking about this is that most of the books that I read have like no children in them at all. And it's making me wonder, where the hell's the children? So I got to think about that for my next book. Um,
that's
just
interesting.
make your world building better. There's children here.
Yeah, I think a lot of books do have like single characters, and or even if there's a romance, it's like the romance being consummated is the end of the book, right? And maybe the next book is about something else, but it's not about necessarily the home life of the characters.
Right. So, you guys got anything else about writing children before we're out of here?
So I've written one of my stories. It's a novelette from the viewpoint of a child of 10 years old who's solving a crime. Um, and one of the things I find interesting is that, and I mentioned this before the show, sometimes kids are more aware and sometimes more capable than what people realize they are. Um, a good example is I met someone and I was talking about this issue with them, and she said, I started making life decisions when I was 8 years old. And I said, what do you mean? She says, well, both of my parents were alcoholics or drug addicts. And so I'm the one who decided that I had to go to school. And I'm the one who managed to steal money from them for groceries before they spent it all. And I'm the one who decided that I had to do this or that. And she said this started for her when she was 8 years old.
So right there
so,
are details in a three-dimensional child character.
Right. And so in my story, I ran right into with my critique partners, I ran right into this issue of, well, we think she's doing too much, more than a child of 10 can do. And I'm like, this girl is an orphan. She lives on the streets. If she isn't this tough and this smart, she's dead. And so it becomes kind of interesting if you really start looking at like where the child is, and what they're having to do in order to get by. And one of the things that I point out that they're really fascinating. Lewis Hine, who belonged to, and I have the link up, so give me 1 second. He belonged to the National Child Labor Committee, and starting in 1913 to around the mid-20s, he documented conditions for children working in factories and on farms and stuff like that. So, pictures of little girls whose job was to crawl into the middle of factory machinery where no adult could go and fix things. And if anybody turned the equipment on by accident, she was dead. a 12-year-old cigar smoking foreman in a factory, kids working on farms. My own grandfather was in the fields at the age of 4 in 1912, picking crops. So it's one of those things again where you start to realize that kids can be much more capable at those young ages than you might expect. But we, as a society, have kind of decided that they should be children, and allowed to play and have what we expect for a child's life.
It was
and
probably the right call.
and it's totally the right call. I'm totally for it. But when you're writing that nitty-gritty fantasy about a girl growing up in a war-torn area and stuff, that might not be the typical child that you're dealing with.
Yep.
So
anyway, it's a topic area, and it mattered to me for my story.
So my final thought on children, writing children. First of all, that's a very large range. We could be talking from infancy to like 17. So there's a lot of variety there. So keep that in mind, that there are different stages of development, and obviously there's going to be different ways you write that character based on how old they are. But my final statement will contrast with David just as an opposite. So yes, there are definitely things that we underestimate about kids and their capabilities. But at the same time, they have a lot of unique vulnerabilities that adults don't have and characters don't have. Not just because of their small size or their physical limitations, but just because of the realities of your emotional growth as a child. I know that there's
lack of experience,
language, like ability to express oneself, all that. I know that there's some mixed feelings about Dr. Phil, like from the Dr. Phil show, but he did say a quote that really stuck with me once when he was doing a show with a child, and he said, sort of paraphrase, he said that children have an uncanny talent for figuring out how something is their fault, whether or not it's true or false. They can figure that, they'll blame themselves for just about anything that goes wrong in a family or in society. So
yeah, I can see that, and that's
absolutely.
Definitely something you can use in a story.
Absolutely, they'll figure out how it's their fault, even if it's absolutely not. And I'm sure he was talking about like divorce or something like that, where
mommy and daddy would be together if it weren't for me.
Right, exactly. So also keep that in mind, and as with everything that you write with characters, have compassion. Just have compassion, have empathy when you're writing these characters, and you'll do a good job of it. But yeah, children, they're an important thing to get right.
Yep. And my last final note is that also write elderly people as a three-dimensional character too. So, we're not all like in the middle of the bell curve. So that being said, write stories that don't suck. That's the big rule. And we'll see you guys next week. Ciao.